Good morning, Royal We Fellowship. We're here and we are running late, and I apologize. I have been setting up the new streaming software. As those of you who follow Royal We Live Chat Monday, you'll know that we had some issues on the new software update, but we're back in it, and I was debugging some things. So let's go ahead and open up in prayer. We are in Genesis 26 today. Our Father, who art in heaven, how holy is your name. And your kingdom will come and your will shall be done, here on this earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day and each and every day our daily bread, and forgive us of our sins, as we forgive those who have sinned against us. Lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from the evil of this world. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. And everybody says, Amen. All right. Thank you all for being here. Hope it looks and sounds good. We want to make through this without any technical delays or any technical issues. We are on Genesis chapter 26, and I'm very excited to be here as we continue on in our journey. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Genesis chapter 26. Now, here we are. We are in the talking about Isaac now. We're going to follow some of Isaac in his life. Isaac is the son of Abraham, who we've been following since the beginning of Genesis, and we're going to see some of the same characteristics that we saw displayed in Abraham through his son Isaac, which is going to reinforce for us ways in which we can live our lives safely without running into certain issues and conflicts. I'm very excited about this message and what we are going to learn. Now, Verse 1, chapter 26. Now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine in Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Now, Abimelech, yes, it's the same Abimelech that we saw Abraham deal with in the past. Now, the context of what's going on here, when you are a sojourner in a land, when you run from place to place, when you're not really established in your own kingdom, yet you're living by faith as Isaac was, as Abraham was, and you're wealthy, you still have to go by what's going on in the land. So if there's a famine, if there's no food, they were suffering the same things. There was no food for Isaac's cattle, no food for Isaac's people, the people that were with him, for him and his wife. And so he needed to go to certain establishments that had stockpiles and had things already in place for this type of thing, okay? And famines were common in the lands back then due to seasons and all kinds of, weird stuff like that. Now, Isaac wanted to just make the journey to Egypt. We see this in verse 2. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live." Egypt, by the way, was the great place. Egypt would have been the America of that time period. Egypt would have been the land of plenty. Egypt would have been the great land of opportunity. Yet there was a lot of risk associated with going to Egypt, making that journey, especially from where they were. It was a great distance, and with the famine, there would have been an awful lot of risk. Isaac was ready for the challenge, I'm sure. Young man, he's like, let's go to Egypt. And he probably got excited, and the Lord had to intervene and put that on his heart, saying, don't go there. And I believe this is something that happens to all of us if we pay attention to. We have the places we want to go. We have a set mind of what we'd like to do, but we get that nudge saying, don't do it, right? Just hold on, right? That's a dangerous journey. And I think it's best and wise if we start to pay more attention to that. So Isaac was urging to go on that long, difficult journey. Verse 3, stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and bless you, says the Lord. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give them all of these lands, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed. Now, the fact that Isaac wanted to go to Egypt gives another indication that the land where they were living in this general area is not that great. If Isaac wanted to go to Egypt, he's looking around going, this is our land. And once again, we see the Lord confirming, listen, stay put because I'm going to bless this land and I'm going to make something happen here. I know it doesn't look like much now. It's a bunch of desert, and it is. If you recall, Abraham and Lot, when they had their argument previously in previous chapters, Lot chose to go to Sodom and Gomorrah, which looked good, and Abraham's looking around and wandering around this desert that looks like absolutely nothing. Oftentimes, when we are in places where we don't see a whole lot going on, it's good to be okay and see what happens, what can flourish there. We don't need to really run off to where the grass is greener. Okay? God oftentimes works in the deserts of our life. When we're isolated, when we feel alone, God works in these places. And so, verse 6 says Isaac stayed in Gerar, stayed where he was. He shut down that desire to run off. Now, verse 7, when the men of that place asked about his wife, and by the way, Gerar is where Abimelech, King Abimelech is. So when the men of that place asked about his wife, Isaac said, she is my sister, because he was afraid to say, she is my wife. Where did we see this before? Like father, like son, we are running into the same not falsehoods. We're going to get into this. Let me finish and we'll get into what's going on here. So the men in verse 7 asked about his wife because Rebekah, Isaac's wife, was a beautiful girl. He says, she is my sister. The same thing that his father Abraham did when they asked about his wife Sarah. He was afraid to say she is my wife. He thought the men of the place would kill me on account of Rebekah because she is beautiful. Okay. I would imagine that Isaac probably learned this from his father. I mean, I don't know how common it is for a person to repeat the exact same words as the father would, unless he was instructed, look, when you go to this place, don't necessarily tell people that this is who you are and this is who she is, because it can be dangerous, right? So just like his father Abraham, we see this effort to conceal truth in order to maintain peace, okay? So when we talk about lying, and I've made a video on the Organic Royal We channel about lying before, we talk about lying in terms of concealing certain truths. We need to understand the importance of when we can do this and when it's an all-out lie. Augustine of Hippo shed some light on this subject. I looked up what he had to say. Augustine of Hippo once said regarding this, hence it is not a lie when truth is passed over in silence, but when falsehood is brought forth in speech. We can gain from this in this toxic world, guys. This is, guys and gals, ladies and gentlemen, people. We can gain some understanding from this when we see that when we're keeping something silent, it's not a lie. If we're withholding a truth that doesn't need to be out there, that's not lying. But when we say falsehoods out of our mouth, then that are lies. And by the way, we'll find out that he wasn't lying, because once again, she is a relative. And I believe in the context in the scripture that in their relation, it was okay to acknowledge that she was a relative. Again, Abraham's servants went and got Rebekah from his hometown, from his relatives, and brought her to Isaac. And so they are, in fact, related in that way, just as Sarah was also related in some way. And so Abraham was able to say, she is my sister. Okay. Is it bad for Isaac to be afraid? Yes. But is there wisdom in Isaac's discernment? Also, yes. Again, we need to understand the nature of toxicity in this narcissistic world that we live in. Oftentimes, if we are in too much of a hurry to express the truth about who we are and what we do, how many of you know by now there are toxic people who are waiting and lying and willing to take you out? What Isaac had to say here, right? The men of this place, I'm afraid the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah because she is beautiful. I think that there's something to that. I think that he understands that that takes place, that it's happened. Why would he say that if that hasn't happened? Why would he come up with this if it wasn't in fact a truth that in that time men would fight one another and kill one another in order to take a woman that was beautiful? If this is a reality of the world, then it makes sense to be wise, as shrewd as a serpent, but innocent as a dove, to work your way around. And this is where we find ourselves in this toxic world. And this is the dilemma that we all face. And again, I'm reminded of when I left California with my family in my own personal life. I was, honest in the fact that we are leaving California. But I withheld telling certain people the exact date and when. It was kind of looming. We're going to leave California. We don't know when. We're thinking about it, right? And then a week later, boom, we're gone. Why share the truth of exactly when and where in order to give people an opportunity to attack you and to spoil your plans? We were honest in that we were moving, but it's not anybody's business as far as exactly when or how, especially if you know that it's in a situation that's going to put you at risk of exposure of some kind of a dilemma. This is where I believe that we're seeing Augustine of Hippo regarding once he said, hence it is not a lie when truth is passed over, okay, in silence, but when falsehood is brought forward in speech. So we can pass over truths in silence. We can withhold silence over certain truths in our life and thus avoid toxic and narcissistic situations. Abraham also went through this as well. Moving on now. Verse 8, when Isaac had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac caressing his wife Rebekah. So Abimelech summoned Isaac and said, she is really your wife. Why did you say she is my sister? Abimelech is confronted once again with the same thing that Isaac's dad, Abraham, did to him. Abimelech is seeing the pattern here, and I'm sure he understands, he's wise, he knows, but at the same time, he's thinking, why in the world are you doing this? You're just like your dad. King Abimelech said, I've seen this before. You are just like your dad. Why are you doing this? Isaac answered him, because I thought I might lose my life on account of her. Abimelech again said in verse 10, what is this you have done to us? One of the men might well have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. Abimelech is doing his part to help instill in Isaac, listen, you can withhold truths, but oftentimes you need to be very careful because one of the men could have slept with her and you would have caused this grievous thing on top of our lives. But also at the same time, I believe Abimelech also understood. He also understood. This is the same Abimelech that Abraham lied to in the same way, right? And if you remember, God approached Abimelech in a dream saying, indeed, I will wipe you out if you touch Sarah, Abraham's wife. It terrified Abimelech, the dream that he had. And so he remembered that dream. And so he approached Isaac saying, why have you done this to us? Don't do this. Don't do this to us. So Abimelech then, though, in honor of Isaac and in honor of God who gave him that dream, in verse 11, Abimelech gave orders to all the people, anyone who harms this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Now, notice that Abimelech gave orders to all the people saying anyone who harms this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Harming the wife, taking her against her will, having a physical relationship with her, that would be considered harm to her. They would be put to death. Anyone who harms this man, Abimelech is addressing the truth of toxicity in the narcissistic nature of people, that there are guys or people who would want to harm Isaac in order to get to her. See, again, Isaac wouldn't have felt the need to lie if he did not have an understanding of the toxicity of humanity, of people who do not have God in their life, who do not share the same morals. Isaac had this understanding that you and I need to understand. This is what caused him to hide that truth to begin with. Abimelech understands this as well. So Abimelech is saying anyone who harms this man will be put to death. He's creating law and order in a world where not a whole lot of that exists. A lot of people wonder the importance of police and of governments and things like this in our culture. Is there a lot of shady stuff in that? Yes, there is. But how many of you know also that law and order also keeps law and order? If we were left in societies with every man for himself, then you could imagine that narcissism would take its roots deep, and it would be every man for himself, and there would be a lot of killing, and there would be a lot of bad things in order to get what people want, because people are inherently selfish. People are not inherently good. And this is what the royal we is about in the awakening, but this is also what we're seeing all throughout the scriptures, is this need to protect and understand that the world is inherently selfish. And in this day and time, we see God intervening, giving people dreams, especially Abimelech, saying, you will lose your life if you mess with these people. This would not need to happen if the inherent hearts of people was narcissistic and able and willing to do whatever they wanted to do to other people to take what they want. Do you follow what I'm saying? This is important for you and I to understand this. Now then, moving on, we're going to jump down to verse 12. After this interaction with King Abimelech, Isaac began planting crops. Isaac began to plant crops in the land, or he had been planting crops in the land. That same year, he reaped 100-fold because the Lord blessed him. When we focus on what God has put before us, the Lord will bless it. This is important for us to understand. But it takes focus, it takes dedication. He spent a year seeding, he spent a long time planting, and the Lord blessed him, blessed Isaac. And the man became rich. And his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. So in verse 13, we see the wealth of Isaac had been growing. In verse 14, he had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Basically, that means they went behind him. When Isaac wasn't looking, they found his father's wells that he had dug up, wells of water, and they buried it with sand. They threw dirt down the wells because they were envious of the power and the wealth and the success of Isaac. They envied. And envy within people causes all kinds of damage. Envy within people causes all kinds of evil. Envy within people is the narcissistic nastiness of this world. Envy is what caused Cain to kill his brother Abel. Envy is at the root. That is where the devil and the enemy crouches down to enter into people's lives. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Verse 16, King Abimelech said to Isaac, move away from us. You have become too powerful for us. Now, Abimelech was being honest. He said, move away from us. You are becoming too powerful for us. But at the same time, this was taken as rejection to Isaac. He did not understand this. Keep in mind that when you and I, as in Isaac, when we are focused on our lives and we are being blessed by the Lord, we're not living in this thing where we realize the power and the success that we're having, and that's as it should be. But other people do notice it. And so when you see in verse 16 that King Abimelech said to Isaac, move away from us, you are becoming too powerful for us, you can almost take this as when you and I hear from toxic people who we are trying to love and trying to get along with, when they say, you think you're better than everybody else, and the narcissistic abuse starts to kick in, and they reject you, and they stop wanting you around. There's a pain associated with that. There's an aggressiveness associated with that, and it's very difficult for us to process, and I believe Isaac was experiencing the same thing. He didn't understand. Why would King Abimelech aggressively say, move away from us, you've become too powerful? It's almost like saying, move away from us, you think you're better than everybody else. Move away from us, you're selfish. Move away from us, you're judgmental. Move away from us, you're powerful. We could almost hear when toxic, narcissistic people in our lives, when they're fighting with you, in a lot of ways, this is what they're saying. Move away. You're too joy-filled. Get away from me. In their moments of anger, get away. Now watch this. George Leo Haycock writes this about it. when King Abimelech says depart, instead of repressing the outrages of his subjects. Now, I want you to understand what George Leo Haycock is saying about this particular verse is that King Abimelech was basing his pushing Isaac out because of his success. He was basing that on his subjects, on the people. King Abimelech was the patriarch of the kingdom, of the subjects, of the people in that area, the people in that kingdom, the people of that land, much like in a family dynamic. And the people of the land were the ones who were getting jealous. They were the ones who were noticing Isaac's wealth. They noticed his success, and they all live in a particular means. They do their jobs. They're a part of a community. They're a part of a system, and they're happy in that, or they were happy in that, they thought, until Isaac comes along, and now he is surpassing them in wealth. He has more cattle, more sheep, more servants, more vegetation. Everything he does is a freaking golden ticket, and all the people are getting very mad, and they're getting filled with envy, and they're outraging. The king, then, King Abimelech, enters into their jealousies, according to George Leo Haycock. The king enters into the jealousies of all the people. He agrees with them. He sees what they're saying, and he says, I get it, you're right. And he banishes a wealthy person. Now, this is interesting. Is there any harm in being wealthy? No, I don't believe so. Is there any harm in being a good, liked and joy-filled person? No. The only harm in it is the perceived oppression that other people have out of envy. This is exactly what you and I experience in toxic family dynamics and in toxic situations where we're in it, we're full of joy. We are full of joy in these situations. Listen, wealth can be not just money, not just cattle, not just vegetation, but your wealth can also be a part of just your life, your pure joy. You can have a wealth and an abundance of joy in your life. You can have a wealth of beauty in your life. You can have a wealth of wisdom in your life. You can have a wealth of anything in your life. And if it's too much for people, then their envy is going to cause them to rage. And we see this play out in life all the time, nonstop. As a matter of fact, a lot of the outrage of the people that in public that we've experienced recently is based on oppression. How many of you have witnessed how people feel so oppressed because of the rich? People feel, is it because the rich are really doing anything wrong? No, it's they're rich. And the oppressed feel oppressed because they're not rich, and they say, we're sick and we're tired of it. We're living in this land, and you get to do whatever you want, and I don't get to. Therefore, I'm outraged, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to throw bricks at buildings, and I'm going to show the world how outraged I am. It's envy. It's envy. It's not being content with what you have and looking at what someone else has and saying, that's not fair. That's not right. And what's interesting about this is that Isaac doesn't understand it because he's not focused on his wealth. He's not standing out there saying, look at me, look how powerful and wealthy I am. And I know that we do see a lot of that from time to time, but Isaac is not. It's just that the people in the community, in the area, are witnessing his joy, his abundance, and it exceeds theirs, and they can't have that because it automatically, naturally creates this oppression. A lot of times in toxic relationships, you and I wonder why people around us are getting so aggressive and so mean and so outraged. When we deal with narcissists, it's like we start to feel they're fighting for their lives when we're doing nothing wrong except being there. We struggle to understand that our existence and our wealth of joy, our wealth of talents, manages to make them feel oppressed and outraged to the point where they say, you think you're better than everybody. You're judgmental. You're selfish, when really what they're saying is you're too powerful. You need to go. I can't compete. I can't keep up. And watching you makes me realize that I don't have what I want to have. This is narcissism. This is narcissism. John Chrysostom writes this. This is what envy is after all. If you want to know what envy is It cannot simply, it's an entity, it's a mindset. It cannot simply accept others' success, but instead regards the neighbor's prosperity as a disaster for them, a disaster for the one looking, okay? Someone else's success. Envy, when you have the entity of envy, it looks at someone else's success as being a disaster for itself and as being a disaster for the envy. And it becomes devastated, it becomes oppressed. This is what causes oppression. It's that envy, okay? This is what envy is. It's not accepting others' success because it causes oppression. And this is what you and I experience when we are in toxic relationships, toxic family dynamics, when they envy a particular family member for their talents. A lot of the scapegoats are the talented ones. And a lot in these situations, that envy causes others to feel oppressed. This is why narcissists cannot handle when you're acknowledged. They can't handle it when you are given awards. They can't celebrate with you your joys in this life. It's because of that envy. That envy devastates them. And it has nothing to do with you, but you don't get it. So they drive you out with their anger. And this is a wild one because how many of you, myself included, we don't look at this world this way? I know plenty of people who are wealthier than I, and lots, because I have nothing here, but it doesn't bother me. I don't feel oppressed. And I'm sure many of you feel the same way. So, but there is a particular mindset, an unawakened mindset. And I believe this is a good indication of who has faith in life and who does not. Narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships opens your eyes to who is faith-filled, who has belief in their heart, who has hope for better things in this life, and who does not. Toxic people, narcissistic people do not have faith. They do not have hope. They do not have a good core belief system. And so when they look at your wealth of joy, when they look at your wealth of talents, they become filled with envy and they rage. Okay? This is our experience with toxic relationships. See, when they accuse you of thinking you're better than everybody else, when they accuse you of thinking that you're more powerful, it's not that you think you're better, but they do. And that is the problem. So Isaac moved away from there. In verse 17, we're on 17 now. Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar. He felt rejected. He felt upset. Verse 18, Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham. So he redug the wells because a lot of the Philistines, out of their envy and their jealousy, covered them with dirt. Oh, well, Mr. Successful Pants over there, well, we'll see how he likes having dirt put in his dad's wells, right? Envy causes people to do all kinds of crazy stuff. Isaac reopened those wells, verse 18, that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham had died. And he gave them the same names his father had given them. Verse 19, Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. Verse 20, but the herders of Gerar quarreled with those of Isaac and said, the water is ours. So Gerar is the area where Abimelech was. Gerar is the place that they pushed Isaac out, right? So King Abimelech, all those people pushed Isaac out. They were jealous of him, of his wealth. They come back out when he finds water. Okay, so Isaac struck gold, basically. There's a famine going on. Isaac and his servants are in the perimeter, in the outer skirts of Gerar, still digging, still doing what he needs to do to be successful, finds water. The people of Gerar, the same ones who drove him out, said, that's our water. You come in, you become successful, you're too powerful, and you're finding our water now. That's our water, okay? And so they started a fight with him. The water's ours, so he named the well Esek. And Esek translates into the word injustice. So is Isaac. This is important. This is an important part of this message. We need to be able to give names to events in our life. So in verse 20, when they approached him, he dug up this well of water. They said, that water is ours, and they fought with Isaac. And so he named that well Esek, which means injustice, because they disputed with him. So he named that well, that place of dispute, injustice. I was unjustly kicked out of that well. They came to me after I put in hard work, dug that well, and they came and fought with me and said that it's theirs. This, by the way, is the same type of toxicity that we see. This is why we go back to that issue of not lying, but passing over certain truths in life, because you run the risk when you cough up too much information of people attacking you, saying it's ours, it's this, and we have a right, and blah, 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 especially out of rage and out of envy. So we have that well that is now called injustice. Verse 21, then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also. So he named it Sitnah. That name means enmity. So Isaac is naming these places, these physical places. He named the first one injustice. He named the second well where they came and fought with him enmity. You see, Isaac is taking mental note, and he's making a diary of his life as he's writing these places where he's been. He's writing the fight that happened here at this well. He's writing down the name of this other well, enmity. And he moved on from there in verse 22, and he dug another well. No one quarreled about it, and he named it Rehoboth, which translates into room enough, saying, now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land. Now, I find it very interesting that Isaac named these particular places in his life, and I find it important that we can be able to do the same. If we look at certain relationships and toxicity, we need to be able to call it that, whether it's family or friends or whomever, and say that toxicity, this is toxic. So we can remember, and we don't have to associate with that. Isaac is creating the memory of where he was and what those wells represent. We should also, in the wells of our life, the wells of our relationships, the things we dig up in this life, put a name to it, assign a name to it, so that we don't return. And when we assign a name to something, a toxic family, we assign a name of something to that in our life, we don't return to it. Even if we pass by it again, we don't return to that well to try to drink from it. The wells in our life, the people who are toxic in our life, who we once drank from, the friendships we once had, where we once got fulfillment out of, if we labeled that at a particular place in time, we don't need to go and drink from that again, because we've labeled it. We can label this one as enmity. We can label this one as toxicity. And then when we find the well in life where we're flourishing, we can call that one home. Does this make sense to you? As Isaac had named his wells. So he knew when he went back to them, he knew what he was drawing from. Isaac had no desire to draw from enmity anymore. He had no desire to draw from injustice. This is what I'm trying to say. That well is called injustice. I named it injustice. I will not go and draw water or draw nourishment from injustice. That well I named enmity. I'm not going to draw any nourishment from enmity. So when we name these places in our lives, toxicity, narcissism, whatever the case may be with people in our lives, we don't go to them and we don't go back and try to draw any nourishment from it. We have it named in our hearts and in our minds. So let's start labeling, let's start naming these situations and these things in our life, so we don't attempt to draw nourishment from these places. Verse 23, from there he went to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. Isaac built an altar there, and he called on the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and his servants dug a well. Meanwhile, Abimelech had come to him from Gerar with Ahuzath, his personal advisor, and Pichol, the commander of his forces. Isaac asked them, why have you come to me? since you were hostile to me and sent me away. Again, we're going back now to that feeling that Isaac had when he was rejected from the land of Gerar. Again, they said, you're too powerful. And I know that when we breeze over that scripture, we can think that it's an endearing thing. Oh, you're too great, you're too rich, go on. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was a complete rejection of what Isaac wasn't expecting. It's the same rejection that you and I experience when we are foreigners and we're visiting family members or in-laws, and they're saying, get out, we don't like you because you're too full of joy. And there's a piece of you that wants to fight back and say, no, I'm not too full of joy, or get out, you think you're better than everybody else. And we're thinking, no, I don't think I'm better than anybody. I'm just here. I want to have a relationship with you. That's a painful experience, is it not? And so Isaac is now confronted with the king who banished him from Gerar in this manner. So it would be as though the toxic and narcissistic people had come back into your life and said, and wanted to talk with you, basically. This is what's happening here. Isaac asked him, why have you come? Why have you come to me? The same thing that you and I should want to know when a toxic person comes back. A lot of times we don't ask what their intentions are when they hoover, or if they come back, or if a toxic person or a mother-in-law or a father contacts you. A lot of times we fail to ask this, but we should. Why are you contacting me? You banished me. Why are you contacting me? Why now are you coming back to me? Since you were so hostile to me and sent me away. It's okay to be honest about that. Why are you trying to contact me after being hostile and sending me away? And so they answered, verse 28, we saw clearly that the Lord was with you. So we said, there ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we did you no harm, but always treated you well and sent you away peacefully. And now you are blessed by the Lord. Isaac then made a feast for them, and they ate and drank. Early the next morning, the men swore an oath to each other. Then Isaac sent them on their way, and they went away peacefully. Interesting. What we see here is King Abimelech's attempt to apologize and to reconcile. Now, a lot of people get forgiveness and reconciliation all twisted up. Forgiveness in life means that you do not exact revenge on people who have hurt you or harmed you or banished you or sent you away. Your family, friends, narcissistic people. We work on forgiveness every day during our healing process coming out of toxic relationships. And every day we need to understand that we already have forgiven them if we are not trying to exact revenge on them. That's all forgiveness is. Forgiveness means you learn to let it be and you move on. And so Isaac had forgiven the situation he had left, but there was no reconciliation. So King Abimelech returns to him. And the difference between what King Abimelech was doing and what a hoovering attempt is King Abimelech wanted to resolve the conflict. He really did. He approached Isaac, and Isaac said, and this is important, we need to understand this with toxic relationships. Once you move on, when they come back to hoover, it's okay to say, what do you want? You got rid of me. What do you want? Why are you here? This puts the burden on them to try to reconcile. And so Abimelech did just that. Abimelech acknowledged that the Lord had blessed him, saying, we see that the God has blessed you. God is with you. We want peace. We don't want you to ever come back and have reason to hurt us, and we no longer want to hurt you. Okay? We don't want to try to hurt you. From this, they reconciled. Isaac was able to make a feast. Now watch this. Did they become best friends again? No. Did Isaac even go back and live with them again? No. All they did was enter into a peaceful treaty saying, we acknowledge our error in the situation. We acknowledge that you are blessed by God in the situation. And we just want to make sure that we're doing our best to be the best people we can be. They feasted together based on this treaty alone. And then Isaac sent them away. It says, they swore to each other, verse 31. Early the next morning, the men swore to each other once again. We won't fight anymore. Okay, and that's great. This is the best possible outcome of a toxic relationship, is if they come back to you saying, we see that God has blessed you. We no longer want any types of issues. Then you can make what kind of treaty? Okay, leave me alone, stay off my social media, this and that, whatever. But then Isaac sent them on their way, and they went their way peacefully. It was all resolved, but they still went away. They went back to their place. Isaac continued on in his journey. They did not enmesh. Oftentimes, even with reconciliation in life with people, it doesn't mean you go back to the same relationship. It doesn't mean that Isaac went back and lived in Gerar again. It doesn't say that. He went on, and so did King Abimelech. But now watch this. Because of their peacefulness, if they ever cross paths again, they don't have anything to worry about, right? Hopefully. Verse 32. That day Isaac's servants came to him and told him about the well they had dug. They said, "We found water," and he called it Sheba. And to this day, the name of the town has been Beersheba. Verse 34 gets into the next chapter. Next Saturday morning, next Shabbat, when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite, and also Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittites. They were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. So we're going to get into that next week. I want to thank you all for being a part of Royal We Fellowship this morning. And we are going to be back here. I'm still working on a lot of the technical issues as far as getting the stream going for both Royal We Fellowship and for live chat. Thank you for bearing with me. I do have links down in the description box down below for you to be able to support, to donate, also for the other channels. And I'm going to be building upon the links down below so that it works out better. Also, be sure to hit the bell notification as well as the subscribe. And be blessed this weekend. Be blessed throughout the week. And I will see you next Saturday morning right here on Royal We Fellowship. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.